As a connoisseur of bad movies, I always thought, why isn't there a bigger market for bad video games? Well, there's a reason. Bad video games are like bad comedy movies. Usually they're not fun. Most bad games are pure suffering for anywhere from 2 to 100 hours. Now, as someone like Mandalore Gaming has shown us, some games override this fact. Usually point and click adventure games, and some horror games. That's because these type of games don't need gameplay to be good or satisfying. Hell, you barely have to have any gameplay at all for you to be able to complete them. You're never going to see a so bad it's good survival game or open world sandbox game, especially a so bad it's good character action game. But what if you try to combine all those into one game with a team that's never even made a video game before? All because of a one-time console creator and massive player in the gaming industry decided that they were going to revive one of their legacy franchises. Are you ready to watch a video about a game that killed a genre classic? But a game that was the final nail in the coffin of a legacy gaming franchise. And we're not talking about Dragon Age here yet. We're talking about Sega's legendary Golden Axe Beast Rider. Golden Axe is a very important part of gaming history, especially to the Sega company. It's one of the games that made the Sega Genesis a household name. Golden Axe made its debut originally in the arcade, and it was a massive hit. So when it was going to be released on the console, it became a massive console seller. Because you can now go home and play Golden Axe on your CRT and not have to spend $20 in quarters. Most people usually think of Sonic when you think of the Sega Genesis, and for good reason. But Sonic came out in 91, while Golden Axe came out in 89. Now, while Golden Axe technically wasn't a launch title, it did come out fairly early into the Sega Genesis life cycle, making it a very important reason for the Sega Genesis's massive success. And you wouldn't have any of these games or this legendary company without the brilliant mind of Robert E. Howard. That's a joke, but it's technically true. The real man behind Sega's original success was lead producer Makoto Uchida. Makoto Uchida was one of the geniuses behind Sega's many early successes. Have you guys ever heard of Altered Beast? That was a launch title for the Sega Genesis. He was also a game designer for games like Alien Storm and Die Hard Arcade. The dude was a game designer and producer for Sega since 1987. And he's still in the industry today, working with Sega as a studio director for the Sega Shanghai studio. And that's all because of his work in the late 80s and early 90s. Well, let's make this clear. He hasn't just been sitting on his ass doing nothing for the last 2 decades. He's apparently more hands-on with a lot of the games than you would think. Iron Man, Sonic Unleashed, Rise of Nightmares, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Yakuza Kiwami, Unicorn Overlord, and even Super Monkey Ball. While for most games he took on a producer's role, others he took a more active role. That started to happen more often because in the PS2 era, they started to do remakes of really old games. One of them being Altered Beasts. Now, most creative types want to protect their properties that they've created, so they're not trash. He didn't do that for the PS2 remake of Altered Beast, so he started to take a more active role, especially for important games, like Golden Axe Beast Rider. Even this guy still couldn't save the franchise from incompetent developers. That's right, even the legendary Makoto Uchida couldn't stop a dumpster fire like this from burning. Honestly, after researching the development of Beast Rider was the equivalent of filling a dumpster with gasoline, striking a match over the top of it, and then trying to put it out with even more gasoline. At every single turn, the development got worse and worse. Matt McMuscles has the best video discussing the hellish development of Golden Axe Beast Rider, but let me sum this video up for you. with some of the information I've collected through my journeys on the internet. The first and most crucial mistake was the hiring Secret Level Studios. Secret Level Studios at this point only created ports, not even ports of good games. They made ports of Final Fight Streetwise, a video on this channel by the way, and Jedi Starfighter. That's it. At this point, they had never even made their own game. And they were making this one from scratch. And they were starting with Sega's legendary IP, Golden Axe. One of the biggest reasons Sega wanted to work with them was because they wanted to enter the Western market. And Secret Level Studios sold them this massive pipe dream of creating a sandbox open world game that had everything. Multiplayer? Check. Badass combat? Check. A game where you could travel an open world on dinosaur mounts. Basically, they wanted to make a better version of Conan Exiles on the PS3. Just to put this in the context, Exiles came out in 2017 and Beast Rider came out in 2008. It's a fantasy game built by a 12-year-old who had the fantasy of making the perfect, most ambitious game ever, to say the least. This is also back in a time where you didn't just get Unreal Engine 5 and make your own game. No, you had to build your own engine for that game to work on it. So now you have an inexperienced team making their own engine for a game genre they've never even worked on before. Needless to say, the engine couldn't handle the open world aspects, and they didn't know this because they weren't knowledgeable enough in this field to figure that out until way later. They never even worked on a multiplayer game to this point, so they didn't even know that their engine couldn't handle it. Surprise, surprise, they started to fall behind on development because of all of the problems with the engine, which caused an overlapping problem since the designers were struggling with making content on the engine. And since they were struggling to make content for the engine, the programmers had nothing to program. So now you have an entire side of the team sitting there waiting while the whole project keeps falling behind. Oh, but it can't get much worse than that, can it? Well, it can, because around the same time, MCU was just about to start becoming a reality. And what team did Sega assign to create the Iron Man game? Secret Level Studios. How can a team make two games, you ask? Simple. They split the team into two. One working on the Golden Axe game, and the other working on the new Iron Man game. What's better than one bad game? How about two bad games? And they decided to make both of them on the same broken, horrible engine. And because Marvel had them under contract to make the game and release it with the Iron Man movie, they had to rush it out ahead of Golden Axe. All while Beast Rider was falling even further behind, and Sega wanted demos to prove that they were working on the game, and they could barely get these demos working. One of the guys even said that if you look too far to the left, the whole game would crash and the whole production would have been shut down if they saw how bad the game was running. And let's be honest, Sega probably should have done that. Secret Level couldn't even do motion capture right. For some reason, the motion capture person decided to do everything in slow motion because he thought it would make everything appear better and easier to work with. Matter of fact, it slowed down production even further because the data that they recorded wasn't usable because it was in slow motion. But because they were inexperienced, again, they thought they could save it. They couldn't. They wasted a bunch of time trying to do this before they eventually had to hand animate everything, wasting even more time. Unsurprisingly, after pumping so much money into this project, Sega was beginning to worry. Why was this game so far behind? And they started thinking about canceling it. Reasonably, they fired all the higher-ups and put new managers in their place. These managers decided to spend the next 6 months crunching these guys until they got this game done. And even after all of this, the new managers looked around and said, "This shit's unsalvageable." That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We are playing the unsalvageable mess. That secret level somehow got working just enough to be released on the Xbox and PlayStation 3. It goes without saying that this game sold poorly and reviewed poorly. Why, you ask? Well, a game that was famous for its co-op gameplay was now a single-player game. They failed everything they promised, and well, I would like you to watch the rest of the video to find out. I have my own personal story with this game. When I was unemployed and the only way I could travel was on bike and foot, I decided to pick this game up because it's probably not as bad as they say, right? Well, I played it for 2 days, gave up after I got to the halfway point of the game, and walked through the Pittsburgh snow 2 miles back to the store to return it. But it gets even better. When I got to the store, GameStop was doing a buy 2 get 1 free sale, so I had to wait in line for another hour till I was able to get rid of this trash. Years later, I'm sitting here thinking I need another game that's bad to play for the channel. And what would be better? You play as Tyrus Flare, the badass Amazonian from the original game. Or, well, this is her reimagined form for the modern audience. The modern audience of 2008. So she's an attractive, red-headed Amazonian who's out for revenge after a clan of Exodian priestess are slaughtered by the Death Adder and his forces of evil. Tyrus acquires the Golden Axe, a legendary weapon that's capable of defeating the Death Adder, but it's not complete, so you must travel the land rebuilding it, before finally reaching Death Adder's castle and destroying him forever. And that's it for the story. It's rather basic. Collect all the pieces of the Triforce and then go kill Ganon. I mean, collecting all the pieces of the Golden Axe and completing it. That's what I meant to say. I mean, other than meeting the other 2 original characters, Tarek the Axe Battler and Gillis Thunderhead, there's not much going on. Most of the story is told through text that you pick up on the ground. It's kind of the equivalent of watching a YouTube video for all the lore. It's basically an in-game version of VOD video. Sadly, I'd probably be more invested in the story if he was doing the videos on this game instead of Dark Souls, but you gotta go where the money is. Now, you've been watching me play this game for, like, what, the last 10 to 15 minutes, right? So what genre would this game be in? Character action? How about a Souls-like? A rhythm game? Technically, it's all 3 because of how the combat system works. You only have 3 options in combat: attack, parry, and dodge. With each enemy attack being color-coded: green, orange, and blue. Green can be parried and dodged. Blue has to be parried. If you try to dodge it, you will be hit. And orange has to be dodged, but can be parried. But if you do, you're open for an attack after you block it. What's the matter, you say? Well, the first problem with the system is the limited offense. All you have is light and heavy attacks. But the problem is the combos are only 3-hit combos, and maybe 2 of those strings aren't even useful. This is a bigger problem when using the heavy attack combos. The heavy attack combos leave you open for attack while fighting multiple enemies. So most of the time you're just going to be mashing square until you're attacked, losing your very important points meter. You only get points and your points multiplier by killing enemies. There is no style meter or technique, nothing. This isn't Devil May Cry. You only increase your points in the points multiplier by killing enemies and, the key here, not being hit. That's right, this is a character action game where the main focus is defense. Let that sink in. Most fights are going to be you standing there waiting for enemies to swing at you and watching for whatever color shows up on the screen. That's kind of why I compare it to a rhythm game. But unlike, let's say, Hi-Fi Rush, that's actually a rhythm game, Golden Axe Beast Rider is the ADHD kid with beat deafness. Enemies will just encircle you and throw out attacks. That's why you can't even use heavy attacks. You always have to be ready to hit the next button to dodge an attack, which leads to instances where you're just blocking and dodging until you get hit, or they die. But that's not even including the fact that both options you have for defense are trash. So let's say you block an attack, nothing happens. You just give room to do a counterattack, right? But what if you block the wrong attack? Well, now you're getting hit with the very next attack for free, which can and usually will be devastating because some moves are command grabs. These command grabs will then steal your health, a large portion of it, and even steal your magic powers, which is devastating because now you don't have one of your most powerful techniques to deal with powerful enemies. Now, I know a lot of people out there are thinking, it's not a big deal, you should be punished for making mistakes. You're right, but what if the mechanic itself just sucks? See, there's no lock-on in this game. So when you dodge, the camera stays right where it was. So when fighting boss enemies, you have to dodge one of their attacks, and the camera will just stay in a bad position. So you can't see their next moves, and sometimes the camera might get just tucked into a wall so you can't see anything. But in my experience with this game, you can't control your dodges and where they go. So can you guess the next problem that causes you? If you're fighting too close to a spiked trap or a pit, there goes your bonus, and maybe even your life. You're being hurt and even killed because the game sucks. And don't forget, this could happen to you all while you're fighting 5 to 6 enemies that are blitzing you with long-range magic attacks and giant dinosaurs breathing fire on you. And at certain points in the game, Death Adder and other magicians can give them buffs to attack faster and more often, throwing you off your timing so you're forced to take damage. And some of you are probably just sitting there thinking to yourselves, at this point, why would you care about the point multiplier and the points in general? You need them at the end of each level, because at the end of each level, if you have enough points, you'll get a gift from God. And that can be anything from 10% damage buffs, 20% damage buffs, to brand new spells. And spells in this game can devastate the tougher enemies. This lets you skip some encounters without even having to deal with the dodging mechanic. So when you take random damage and lose all those bonuses, it could put you back, like massively. We're talking about taking away buffs that you need to get through this game. Now, as you can see, I'm playing terribly throughout this game. I'm struggling every single fight. So how did I get such massive point multipliers? Well, you have to abuse a mechanic that's the name of the game: beast riding. Beast riding is the best and worst part of Golden Axe Beast Rider. And that's because these are the most powerful tools at your disposal. But they also ignore everything the game has been teaching you thus far. The beast, while you're riding them, have no defensive moves. But the good thing is, the beasts you ride have their own separate health bar, so they take damage instead of you, meaning your multiplier doesn't get touched. The only thing that will end up happening is you'll get knocked off, which is a problem because the enemies will knock you off, take them, and use your own weapon against you. Then of course your multiplier is gone again because they're riding the giant monster that's crushing your skull. The true power of the beasts comes from hit and run tactics. Look, this is what optimal gameplay looks like in the Golden Axe Beast Rider. This is why it's the biggest failure in the game. It's not fun, and it's necessary to complete it. Also, the whole time I'm playing this game, the only thing I can think of is, yeah, why can't you be normal? Every other game plays like God of War or Devil May Cry. If you just did that, the game wouldn't be that bad. It actually would have been pretty decent. Hell, I'd be doing a different video calling this a hidden gem. And I'm just gonna be honest, You could tell from the game's design that the developers knew it was trash already. You could see that with some of the ideas they had in some of the levels. Because they were in such a rush to get this game out, they couldn't really playtest it. And I'm talking like 20, 30, 40 enemies. Just wave after wave of these guys running at you. And they know they put too many people there. But instead of rebalancing it to fix the issue, they just put a healing platform in the center, making the entire encounter a waste of your time. They also did the same thing with magic platforms. Since magic basically kills most enemies with 1 or 2 hits, you could just stand on the platform and mow enemies down with fire. It honestly feels like they've never even played other character action games, especially from this era. But that has to be a lie because these guys worked on Final Fight Streetwise, which is better than this. Genuinely, one of the biggest problems with Beast Rider is playing it. It is a shame. If it was just genuinely generic, it would be far better than where it is right now. Golden Axe Beast Rider has some of the worst identity crisis problems I've ever seen in gaming. If you looked in its bio, under pronouns it'd have a question mark. Genuinely, the biggest problem this game has is it always picks the worst direction. It's a Bugs Bunny cartoon where they should have made a left, but they always make a right. Like, think about the fact that this game should have had multiplayer. They made it single player. They wanted to make it an open world game and ended up making a mission-based action game. You wanted to make an action game, but the combat sucks and is very obsessed with being defensive when it should be aggressive. They wanted to make a huge, expansive world, but they didn't have a story. They didn't have a story because they didn't have enough time and had to rush it out the door. And you didn't have any of these things because you didn't have the talent and time to make it the way you wanted to make it. This game, from the top to the very bottom, from concept to completion, was a disaster. Golden Axe Beast Rider is incompetence on some of the grandest scales I've ever seen in gaming. I genuinely don't think there's ever been a bigger failure in gaming until, well, Concord, and that's saying something. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. You can become a member. I will eventually do some content there with like live streams where you can ask questions. Hope you enjoyed the video and enjoy your afternoon.
The beast beneath the mountain has awakened. The boar lives, Gillies. Bloody shit!